Hello everyone, good afternoon. It's my pleasure as the chairman of the Wembley Sephardi Synagogue to welcome everyone to this special event in memory of our dear ex-rabbi Yossi Houri, 40 years service to the synagogue, and a special welcome to a close family friends, Claudia, Natalie, who is in Israel, but will be hopefully able to watch the recording of this event, and also sons Yavin and Gabriel. Also special welcome to Diane Toledano. Great to see you, Diane. Diane Kada, of course, and the main guests, Rabbi Berger, thank you. Organizing this, and Jack, everything is done. So now I pass over to Ivana. Jack first, and then you take over. Thank you again.
Welcome everyone.
Use the microphone. Right? No one will hear you. Use the microphone. Step behind you, step.
Welcome everyone. So today's event's gonna be a mixture of people speaking, and my late father actually recorded over many years both Yossi and Diane Toledano, who's here with us today and will speak. So we've got quite a collection of recordings, and I've picked a recording from different services, different High Holy days, and hopefully it will give a bit of flavour. Just how amazing the rendering Yossi was. Yossi, you walk in, you think he is Spanish or Portuguese. He was neither. Tunisian. But no one mastered it better than him. And hopefully you will hear that over the course of the afternoon. Without further ado, I will call first on Yaniv to speak.
Yoshut, Dayanim, Rabbanim, family and friends, and of course the very special community of Wembley Spanish and Portuguese. A big thank you to the Ziluf family everyone at Wembley for organising this very special event. I'm sure my father is here with us, listening very carefully to every word. King Solomon writes, Tov Shem Shemen Tov, B'yom HaMavet Miyom Hivaldo. A good name is better than good oil, and the day of death is better than the day of one's birth. Now we've often focused on the first part of this verse, where we understand the value of a good name is priceless. But the second half is quite confusing. Don't we learn life must be protected at all costs? Only in the rarest occasion is death preferred over life. One explanation is that only at the time of one's passing can one's accomplishments really be truly appreciated, and one's name is known and more meaningful than at birth. When a person is born, his name is perhaps just a label. True, we choose a name with hopes and desires of what that person will become, but that name rarely tells us anything specifically about that person. So my father's name, Yossi or Yosef, means to increase or enlarge. And with his very special voice and service to the synagogue, he truly expanded this whole community. For over 40 years, he was very much loved here, the heart and soul of the Beit Knesset, although we used to joke that he served longer than Moshe Rabbeinu did, serving Bnei Israel in the desert. And every year he kept on telling us, this year I'm going to retire, but he never did. He chose to continue. He devoted his life to this community, exemplified by the many hundreds of messages and calls and emails we received from all around the world, sharing heartwarming stories, of how my father helped them in good as well as bad times. Others attributed their love of Judaism to the inspiration my father gave them. As you know, my father was very punctilious about being in synagogue on time, the Hebrew calendar, and pronunciation. He taught hundreds of bar mitzvah boys their parashiot, and he knew instinctively which parashah belonged to which week. To this day, I still don't know how he did it. The story goes, when I was born, he didn't say it's a boy, he said it's Vayechi. He came over from Tunisia when he was about 17, not knowing a word of English. He slowly learned the language, obtained a degree in biblical studies, qualified as an accountant, and became a chazan here in Wembley. This tale of achievement from humble beginnings could not have been possible without the kindness of this community. From helping him purchase his first home, to sharing with my mum classic British cake recipes, which I'm especially very grateful for. I always remember him as a very hard-working person, constantly putting in 100% to whatever he was doing, whether it was helping us with homework, making our Purim costumes, or his several jobs. He was always very humble and never sought grand titles or praise. For example, in our house in Kenton, just down the road, there's a large framed photo displayed on the wall. In that photo, my father was shaking hands with Chief Rabbi Mervis, whispering something in his ear. Intrigued, one evening I asked him, "What did you tell the Chief Rabbi, Dad?" Now, even though my dad was very knowledgeable in Tanakh and Gemara, he sought truth and never honor. He hated praise, preferring humility. And in a room full of very distinguished guests on that day, he decided I'd rather go up to the Chief Rabbi quietly, and just for the sake of sharing a chiddush, lishma, for Torah's sake, rather than my own praise. I've got many very fond memories growing up here in this synagogue, from the choir and the beautiful melodic S&P tunes to Yom Kippur, where rather than me looking at the watch every 5 minutes to see when the files would come out, I was watching Diamond Toledano with my father closely, because I knew the second they embraced and hugged, that is when Yom Kippur really came out. And of course my father begging everybody to stay for 5 more minutes to do our bit afterwards. My father related to me how when he was trained to be a chazan for the S&P, the choir master used to make all the chazanim line up and used to bang their chests with a metal spoon, ensuring the vibrations originated from their stomachs rather than their throats. He thought this was very strange. He will always be remembered for his unique voice, as well as good name living on. A good voice does too. And as we mentioned before, we're going to hear some of the recordings later. Sadly, he won't be able to teach his grandsons here today their parashiot, but he taught me well enough to pass on the tunes, although probably not to his standard. And as we just read in the parasha last week, spies were sent to check out the land. Sadly, just like Moshe, he too never got to look and check out the promised land, even though he was planning to make Aliyah imminently. But my mother, please God, will be making Aliyah very soon, living near my older sister, and we wish her every happiness. My father was always calm, even if in the face of adversity or distress, constantly being my voice of reason and logic throughout life's trials and tribulations. His famous mantra of, "It will work out in the end, it will be okay," echoes in my mind still to this day. Both his family and community miss him, and it still feels very strange without him, especially being in this synagogue with so many familiar faces. All that is left to say is, thank you for coming, thank you for welcoming him into the community more than 60 years ago. Wembley will always have a very special place in our hearts. Thank you.
So the first recording we're going to play is poignant actually because firstly it's last week's Haftarah, which was actually read by one of our younger members of our community. But also the same Haftarah is Shabbat Hanukkah, which, as we all know, Yossi passed away just before Hanukkah started.
ושחרתי בתוכך הסירו הבגדים הצועים מעליו, ויאמר אליו, ראה העברתי מעליך עוונך, והלבש אותך מחלתות. ואומר ישימו צניף צחור על ראשו, וישימו הצניף הצחור על ראשו, וילבישוהו בגדים, ומלאך צבאי עומד.
And that's hopefully a flavour. Again, as with all the recordings, hopefully we'll make the whole thing available at some point. Now I'll call on Diane Toledano.
Yusuf Morai Rabotai, I think everything has been said by Yaniv. I'd just like to add that when I came back from Amsterdam, I was absolutely astonished. His death was absolutely unexpected, and I just couldn't believe it. And I would like also to say that we had a wonderful together many times, wonderful relationship. He spent many years in our home every Shabbat, and he mastered the tunes of the SNP very, very quickly. His parasha was absolutely faultless. The tunes on Yom Kippur and every Shabbat was absolutely excellent. No one could say absolutely, if I were to read the parasha, I could not read the parasha exactly like he has read it, with beautiful ta'amim and flair and experience. He had a gift for grabbing quickly the tunes and the melodies of any song. And now he's obviously in Olam Haba. You know, my friends, there are times when we hear some people have climbed the Mount of Everest, the highest mountain in the world. And once they reach the summit, what happens? They come down, and that's it. David HaMelech is saying, Mi ya'aleh behar Hashem? Who will ascend the mountain of the Lord? And to ascend the mountain of the Lord is also extremely high. You need to keep the kashrut, keep the Shabbat, keep tefillin, keep many, many mitzvot. And once you have reached Mi ya'aleh behar Hashem, then you should stay there. Umi yakum bimkom kocho. It's not enough to climb. Climbing Har Hashem is just not enough. But umi yakum bimkom kocho. Now you may ask, how do we reach this summit of Har Hashem, which Yossi in fact is able to reach it? And the answer is very simple. Neki chapayim ubar levav. You need to have clean hands. By clean hands we mean a person has to be sincere, has to be honest, has to be upright. And the moment your uprightness is absolutely as it should be, then you have reached the summit of Har Hashem. Ubar levav, and you need also to be of pure heart. Yossi had a pure heart. He has helped many people, many bar mitzvah, and so on and so forth. May the Almighty God, without me elaborating, rest his soul in peace, and may the Almighty God comfort his wife, his daughters, Yanin, and indeed all of us, because we will remember him for many, many years to come. תהא נשמתו צרורה בצרור החיים. Amen.
And now call on Reverend Yossi Houri.
It saddens me that we are here today without Yossi in person. Normally on communal occasions, I would find myself sitting next to him and benefiting from his insightful comments on practically any subject. When Yossi retired from this Kahal Kadosh of the Spanish and Portuguese Wembley community, I could not believe my luck when he decided to come to us regularly. We were, after all, just a few minutes walk away. I, of course, invited him to take services which he reluctantly accepted, having retired. However, whenever the need arose, he readily offered his services, and his help was hugely appreciated. Sometimes, like on Shabbatons, he would deliver a shiur to the community, invariably rich and challenging in content, while still fresh and interesting. We at the David Ishak Neve Shalom valued his services very much. On many occasions we tried to compensate him financially, but to no avail. I often sought his advice on halachic matters and otherwise, but unless something was very wrong, he would not interfere. His knowledge of Judaism was vast, ranging from Gemara, Halakha, Midrash, grammar, and modern literature. As I mentioned in the Shiva, whenever I read the Sefer, and Diane Toledano mentioned this, Yossi was amazing at reading the Sefer Torah practically faultlessly. I found myself preparing doubly carefully, knowing that no error would escape him. And when and if he corrected me, it was so subtle that it was hardly noticed. Yossi was an avid reader of an eclectic range of books and an ardent follower of past great rabbis like the Shelah Kadosh and contemporary ones like Rabbi Meir Mazuz, whose thoughts he occasionally and enthusiastically shared with me. Yossi was admired by teachers at the college for his, and when we were children in Tunisia, for his high intellect and for invariably taking his studies very seriously, whether it's Talmud, Hebrew grammar, literature, English or maths. Yet he was humble and kind, and I remember on a few occasions in Tunisia where the rabbi was teaching us and his son was present. And if his son couldn't answer a question, then Yossi, who for sure knew the answer, when asked would shake his head, because the teacher would be even more vexed that his son did not know while another child knew the answer. Yossi was a remarkable man from an exceptional family in southern Tunisia. They were, without exception, very special. Their house was one of those that stood out for its charm and style. His father, Rabbi Chameis ben Zion Houri, was a great, well-known rabbi and author of many books. And Rechev Israel, I just saw it there, is Rechev Israel, commentary on the Torah, is being used in this community. Yossi's mother, Sharina, whom I had the painful pleasure to meet a year ago, the first time in many, many years, was and is elegant and diplomatic. We reminisced about Yossi in the presence of Claudine and the family, both from London and from Israel. And I could see where Yossi got some of his qualities. Among her tears, there were words of great wisdom and consolation. In other circumstances, she would have been publicly acknowledged as the true example of Solomon's Eshtai, which she indeed was. Yossi inherited many of these qualities. A born leader, he took the initiative when it was necessary, following in the advice of Rabban Gamliel of Imkom she'en anashim, hishtadel liyot ish, and when there aren't people around, strive to be that person. In Montefiore College, his diplomacy and leadership skills were quickly recognized, and so he became a de facto head boy, liaising with the college's trustees and management with any issue which concerned us, composing letters of phenomenal level in language and analytical skills, pure poetry written in prose. I still miss Yossi very much. I still mourn him. This is not only because I was suddenly deprived of his support and friendship. It is also because he went before his time. Let me explain. We are told in Masechet Avot, Hu haya omer, ben 5 shanim lamikra. He used to say, that's Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. He used to say, at 5, Jewish male child, at 5 years of age, the study of Mikra, Torah, Scripture. Ben 10 LaMishnah, at 10, the study of Mishnah. Ben 13 LaMitzvot, at 13, subject to the commandments. Ben 15 LaTalmud, at 15, study of Talmud. At 30, the peak of strength. At 40, wisdom. At 50, able to give counsel. At 60, maturity. And the story is told of a Hasid who came before the Devrei Yoel Satmar Rebbe and declared, Rabbi, I believe I deserve a hearty Mazal Tov today. The rabbi said to him, why? He said, because it says in the Mishnah, at 60, we achieve maturity, and I'm actually today 60, so I've achieved maturity. The rabbi shook his head and he said, the Mishnah is not speaking about you. Why not? Said the man. Because what comes before that are stages that unfortunately you never achieved. At 5 for Mikra, when did you ever could read Hebrew properly? At 10 Mishnah, when did you learn Mishnah? At 15 Gemara? Well, Yossi did more than that. He followed those early stages and more. I feel therefore he deserves the latter ones. Ben Shiv'im LaSeva, at 70, fullness of years, which he did. Ben Shemonim LaGvora, at 80, the age of strength. He was so looking forward to an exciting retirement in Israel. We read yesterday in the parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu sent the 12 spies. And he says, check this, check that, bring some fruit. And then he says, Aim yesh ba'etzem ayin. Is there a tree or not? What do you mean? You told us to bring fruit, so there must be trees. So Rashi explains, Etz is not at all about talking about trees. It's talking about a tree, an outstanding human being, some great tzaddik that we could actually lose the war because of that man. Well, Yossi was an etz, a great etz in our synagogue, and this one. And losing him, we lost a very, very important, outstanding man. I am, however, consoled by Rabbi Yaakov's words in Pirkei Avot, where he says, Yafa sha'a achat shel korat ruach ba'olam haba mikol chayei ha'olam hazeh. More precious is 1 hour of satisfaction and tranquility in the next world, in the world to come, than all of the life of this world. In the adapted words of Nehemiah, Zochra lo Elokim letova. Oh God, remember all of his good deeds to his credit. Elevate his dear soul to the highest celestial spheres of Gan Eden to rest with Tzaddikim and Hasidim. Console all of his dear ones, his mother, his wife, his children, brothers, sisters. Help his descendants carry on his and his ancestral holy legacy to become an eternal source of virtue and righteousness, and a fitting and proud memorial to his dear neshama. Tehi nishmatot she'ora b'tzor ha'chayim, may his soul be bound up in the road of life. Amen.
Amen. So the second recording we're going to play, actually it took me until last year I discovered it, was actually Yossi recorded it for me in 2007 and I hadn't realised. So, I mean, I do sometimes Rosh Hashanah Shachrit, and obviously he recorded that for me. As I was converting it for this service to a more modern form, before pressing stop as I got to the recorder, he'd actually recorded a whole load of stuff for Pesach, Shavuot and Sukkot, which I obviously never discovered until now. So the second recording is one of the many Kadishim he recorded, which we do here.
קדיש מלכי העולמים אמן. יתגדל ויתקדש בעלמא דבעלמא קירותי ויזיב מלכותי ויצמחו כלב יקרם בשפחי לחייכון ויומכון וחייכון לישראל בעלה ובזמנתך
former chairman at the time of Yossi Houri, who can't be with us today but has sent in a recording.
Claudine, Yaniv, Natalie and Gabrielle, rabbis, Wembley family, friends. It's an honor for me to have been invited to speak on this memorable Wembley family occasion. Yossi passed away over a year ago, and I consider this afternoon to be a celebration of a life of service and a tribute to a member of our family, a very special member of our family. Yossi has left an indelible mark in many ways. Without a doubt, he was the voice. He was not Spanish nor Portuguese, but his knowledge of the SMP liturgy was profound. He stands with the likes of Reverend Abinur and Ben Roche as the transmitters of this unique liturgy. His Hebrew diction and exact pronunciation were exemplary. Indeed, this attribute has shaped the way many here have learned to read. It's no surprise, therefore, that in the course of this afternoon, the Wembley Committee have chosen to play recordings of his. For many of us, his voice has marked important occasions and family occasions. On a personal note, he trained both my sons Mark and Denny for their bar mitzvah, even though at the time we were a long way from London. They also insisted that he participates in all my children's wedding ceremony. Yossi was not a dazzling orator, and considering his knowledge, he never spoke down to his listener. His sermons were clear and his Dvar Torah precise. The fact that he was a reverend who also worked in the secular world meant that he was able to combine and bring together lofty ideas with day-to-day events. This ability gave much greater poignancy to his message. Yossi served Wembley for over 40 years. He arrived, I remember, as a young bachelor and quickly integrated the younger members, including myself. We all married roughly at the same time and became parents roughly at the same time. Yossi was a private person, unassuming. His personal qualities endeared him to us, indeed, to all that knew him. His legacy is tangible, and he will be remembered with love and admiration by us and by all that knew him. Yossi, thank you, and rest in peace.
Now call on former member of our community, who's again Yossi from his teenage years, and current chair of Lauderdale Road, Susan Candell.
Friends here in Wembley. Robert and I were both teenagers at Lauderdale Road when we first met Yossi. He'd arrived from Tunisia at a very young age to study at the Montefiore College and was known from then on, as was Spee, as one of the college boys. Even when grown up, he'd always be referred to as a college boy. As a group, they would sit together in the synagogue and from time to time would regularly take parts of the service. Even from those very, very early days, it was always such a pleasure to listen to Yossi read the service. He became a chazan here in Wembley after Chalfon ben Arosh, Zichron Livracha, moved to Bevis Marks. And services at that time were being held in the church hall in East Lane, long before this synagogue was even built. But looking around, I think a lot of us remember that place as well as this one. Over the years, he became a friend and would come and eat with us on Shabbat and Yom Tov before he and Claudine were married. I can still see him sitting in our lounge. I can picture it still, shortly before he flew back to Tunisia for his wedding. Whilst he was a chazan, before he was married, he used to stay regularly with a couple in Manor Drive in Wembley over Shabbat. But on the long summer days, he would often walk back to Jews College where he was studying. It's quite a walk from Wembley to Jews College. It wasn't in Hendon, it was near Baker Street at the time. And he would tell us that he would stop off at Willesden Library on the way to have a break. He'd read the newspapers, and then he'd carry on with his walk. He came to us sometimes. I'm sure he came to Toledano as well. His very closest friends at the time were Eve and Philip Bloom, and he used to spend a lot of time with them in their home in the Avenue. Numerous bar mitzvah boys from here have learnt their portions from a Yossi tape, as well as many of the chatanim over the years. How many haftarot must he have recorded for people? Too many to count, I think. I believe many of those tapes are still in circulation. They're probably now CDs, but they're still around. Our own son Jonathan, whose bar mitzvah portion is next week for Korach, also learnt his bar mitzvah from a Yossi tape. When speaking to our daughter Deborah for her memories of Yossi, they were all positive and happy. Once we'd all settled here in the new synagogue, the youngsters, our next generation, would often chat informally to Yossi on a Shabbat afternoon, and he would explain to them many aspects of Jewish life in a very approachable manner. She remembers him once explaining all about Marat Ayin, and how you had to be seen to be doing the right thing. It came up because some of her friends had wanted to go and eat chips at McDonald's. It had just opened and the story was going round. Oh, but they cook their chips in different oils. So Yossi very patiently sat down and explained to them why that was not a possibility. She recalled that if he was asked a question, he would often raise his eyes up, as if thinking or looking for inspiration. And she said to me, if I had a question to ask, he would be the one I'd go to. He was always willing to share his knowledge without judgment. No question was too small for us to ask him, and I felt comfortable asking him anything. Whilst he was studying for his GCEs and A-levels at Montefiore College, one of his teachers, now Professor Isaac Benabu, who remembers Yossi as one of his most gifted students in English language and literature, said to me he had a lively mind with a gift for understanding and discussing literature in a language which had been completely foreign to him. Isaac recalled being so proud whenever he came to Wembley when listening to Yossi delivering a sermon in this synagogue, giving a fresh perspective on the parasha. That Yossi's command of English was almost flawless. It was always a pleasure to listen to him, whether in Hebrew or in English. Although we've been away from Wembley for many years now, I can still hear Yossi's voice in my head, especially on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, those services at which he excelled. Thank you, Yossi.
as Susan referenced, our next recording, well, I can't play the whole High Holy Day services. I have selected a small few minutes of bits of it. So this is part one of a small part.
Beginning with the Chazara of Rosh Hashanah. ויגיד תהילתך ברוך אדוני אלוהי אבותינו אלוהי אברהם אלוהי יצחק אלוהי יעקב האל הגדול הגיבור והתורה אל עליון גומר חסדים טובים קונה הטוב וזוכר חסדי אבות באהבה וחיים ומושיע ומגן ברוחי מגן אברהם אתה גיבור לעולם וחיים את גבעתה והושיע הורדתה מכלכל חיים וחסד וחיים מתים ברחמים רבים סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו משלח מי חמוך בגברות ומינו מלאך ומצביע ישועה ונאמרת לי החיות מתים ברוך אתה חי לחיי המתים
call on is former chair of our congregation, Dr. Julian Krishna.
Diane, Robin, Claudine and family, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak this afternoon at Yossi's memorial service. It was a great privilege to have known Yossi, and I really appreciate being given the time to share some thoughts with you today. Much has already been said about Yossi, but something that hasn't been mentioned is that he was for a time the head teacher at Holland Park Hebrew classes, where Ben Nathan children attended. Lorraine, my sister-in-law, remembers all the children sitting together in the men's section of the synagogue and Yossi teaching her the Olenin prayer. Now, some of you might find this very difficult to believe, but I'm told that Colin was a bit of a tearaway at Hebrew classes, and he spent more time in Yossi's office than he did in the classroom. For some reason, one day my brother-in-law David decided to emulate his older brother. Yossi called David into his office and told him to concentrate more and not misbehave like his brother. David was so scared that he immediately stopped misbehaving and didn't try it again. I don't think scary is usually associated with Yossi, but there you go. One word more frequently associated with Yossi was kindness. Joanna says that when Yossi went to get married and he flew to Tunisia, her father, who worked at Heathrow Airport at the time, took Yossi to the airport and helped him through security with special privileges. Yossi never forgot this and visited Joanna's father on a regular basis, particularly as he became older and found it more difficult to get around. Lorraine also remarked that Yossi would always ask after her sons, as indeed he would always ask about my sons, Alex and Jeremy. Yossi was obviously hugely involved with the Wembley community as the Hazan for many years, and I was privileged to be asked to help with organising a dinner to celebrate Yossi spending 40 years with the community. And I've noticed that some of the photos from that occasion have been shown this afternoon. It was a really lovely evening with many present and former members of the community coming together to join in the party. I was very pleased that we were able to hold this event to honour Yossi, and we are so immensely grateful for his enormous contribution to the community over all those years. Yesterday's Parsha, as has been said, was Shalach Laha. I think that it's appropriate to mention here that Yossi was the most incredible laner, if lane is a word, we're not quite sure. His laning was always 100% accurate and melodic and a joy to listen to. He once told my father-in-law Martin when he was visiting a synagogue and their reader did not turn up for some reason. Yossi said not to worry and laned for them off the cuff, which is a really incredible and an outstanding skill to have. In Shalach Laha, in both the Parsha and the Haftorah, spies are sent out into the land of Israel and then report back. In the Parsha, Moses sends 12 spies into the land, but only 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, come back with favourable reports. I know that Yossi would have definitely been siding with Caleb and Joshua, as he was very keen to visit Israel and to spend more time there after his retirement. It is indeed a great shame that he didn't have more time to do this. I think one of the biggest compliments I can pay Yossi today is to say that my son Alex, one of the younger members of the community, told me how inspired he was by Yossi and how he really wanted to be here today. But in a way, I think that Yossi would have been pleased with the reason that he can't be here, because he's currently in Israel. Thank you.
Now call on Rabbi Dwek, Senior Rabbi at Centre.
Toledano, Kada, Rabbi Musi, Rabbi Berger, Kal Kadosh. The Hachamim famously recognize that the great leaders in our history had a job that they did before they took on the mantle of their great leadership or their historic leadership. And that is that they were often shepherds. Especially with Moshe Rabbeinu, Hachamim point out the fact that he spent a great deal of time with sheep before he spoke to God. And that it was precisely his time with sheep that attracted God. It was because of the way that he treated his flock that HaKadosh Baruch Hu called him to his holy mountain and spoke to him from a fiery bush. My first meeting with Rav Yossi was in this room. As I was coming into the community in 2013, before I had moved, the Ma'amad wanted to make sure that I visited everyone in the community and outside the community, and I had a special trip that I took to Wembley, and I met with Yossi right in this room at the desk over here. I remember it very clearly, because the first thing that struck me was his humility. It was very clear that there was absolutely no ego in that man. It was also extremely clear that his years of service and his custodial responsibility that he had for this congregation was held in his mind and heart of the highest esteem. And so I sat before him as a student and listened, because I recognized immediately that to sit with him with the time that I had was precious, because what he would be able to share with me, say to me, what he chose to be able to give over to me was going to be extremely important for me to know as I was coming into this position, which was and is the great honor of my life to serve. And he spoke about the community. He spoke about the history of the community and where it was that he saw it now. He spoke very candidly, did not mince his words. He was a man of truth and clarity, as has been mentioned. But he also had another aspect to him, a word that we use in Hebrew called hen. And hen is just grace. There's something special, and we could all hear it in his voice. There's something just simply beautiful about his voice. Because in his reading of the prayers here, and as is said in his reading of the Torah, that I also had the merit of hearing him on several occasions, there is this simple honor that he gave to it always. And there's no question that the way that that happened was because there was no ego. He came here like many of his colleagues at 14 years old. And I know that he was together in this group, although I didn't, this was certainly before my time, and I didn't have a lot of time with Rabbi Yossi. I have thankfully spent Ibadil HaChaim a great deal of time with Rabbi Elia. And Rabbi Elia was a comrade of Rabbi Houri, as was Rav Tzvi. And we can hear in Rav Tzvi's words the brotherhood that this class, this unique group of young men had. And in all of the time that I've spent sitting next to Rabbi Elia, listening to many, many, many stories of what it was like to be part of that Montefiore College and to be at Jews College and to learn with Rav Rabinovich and to be in that place, in that world, in that era. There are many things that I learned from that, but one very clear point that I've taken from it is these boys were so young. Imagine leaving not just home to go to another city, but to go to another country with another language at 14 years old. the bravery and courage that required. And that in all of that sacrifice, and I will call it sacrifice because I believe it is, for a 14-year-old boy to leave home, and for all intents and purposes, yes, there were visits, but for all intents and purposes, not to go back. At 14 years old, is no small sacrifice. And from that point, from that time, they dedicated their lives, as did Rav Yossi, to shepherding a flock, to service. And Rav Yossi, along with his comrades, along with his colleagues, did so, I believe, without ego. And that, perhaps you will agree with me, is sadly a rarer and rarer breed. And as we mourn and recognize and honor his life and his contribution, we also recognize and honor that cohort. We honor that cohort, that level of service in which life cycle events, how many bar mitzvahs, as Susan said, how many parashiyot, how many haftarot, how many burials, how many weddings, how many lives and how many points in life was he invited to share in, to guide us in, to lead us in, to serve us in. And he did it with his whole heart, in one way or another, for over 40 years. It's remarkable. It's actually staggering, really, when we think about it. If we pause just to kind of digest that, to absorb that, what that means to live such a life. And he did it. And he did it with gladness and happiness and chen and beauty. And we, as a community, and I say this as a senior rabbi, even coming towards the end of his tenure, we as a community are exponentially richer because of him. And it is important for us to pause and to acknowledge that and to thank him with all of our hearts for his heart that he gave us. May his zechut, his merit, and may his teachings, and may his way stand for us and for his family and all that he holds and held dear. And may we remember the way. May we remember the way that he did it and encouraged it. And may his memory, please God, be a blessing for us all and his family. Amen. Amen.
So, our penultimate recording is what I consider actually one of what I call the crown jewels in our collection. And it's again from High Holy Day services.
Kaddish, Rosh Hashanah. Amen.
Again, all the full recording is available for more to hear it. Next, I will call on Yossi's successor here at Wembley. No further, Brian Carter, who was just got by Carter when he started.
Berger, Senior Rabbi Dweck, and Toledano, Reverend Amusi, Wembley family. The word Ronnie in his speech used a number of times, which is indeed the sense, feeling which we have always when we come back here. What more can be said at the whole afternoon hearing all about Rav Yossi? What a special person he was, and the service and leadership which he gave to so many. There's an episode right at the end of the Torah. The end of Parashat Ha'azinu, the penultimate parasha of the Torah. You read it, almost seems as if God, as it were, is taunting Moshe. God tells Moshe, climb up the mountain, go up on it, and see the entire land. You can look at it. כי מנגד תראה את הארץ, ושמה לא תבוא. You can look at it, but you can't come to it. Yaniv, you mentioned earlier how your father would sometimes joke that he was longer than Moshe Rabbeinu, just over 40 years. But when I read this story and I think of Yossi, I think of the similarities between me and Moshe, because I recall just literally a few days before we heard the terrible, devastating news, Yossi was in constant touch with me, writing letters for the Aliyah process. We had the final letter approved and it was all ready to go. He had everything ready for Aliyah. He saw the land, the promised land, he was ready to go into it. Unfortunately, he didn't get that merit and privilege of being able to fulfill the dream of his life. And like what we said, it's difficult when you think about it. It's very hard to stomach how a person who had dedicated so much to the community, to shepherding this Kahal Kadosh for so many years, got to see the land but never actually got to live in it. There are a few points I would like to mention about Rav Yossi. Some of them have been mentioned, which stood out from me. There's a phrase which Moshe uses about HaKadosh Baruch Hu twice in the Torah. Once in this week's parasha and once again in a few weeks' time. And that is, he calls God Elohei HaRuchot Lechol Basar. God is the God of spirits of all flesh. And later on, when Moshe is, as all good leaders do, think of a successor, Moshe tells God, appoint someone who can be Elohei HaRuchot. Appoint someone, you God of spirits, appoint someone who is able, just like you created every single human being with their diversities and their nuances and their differences. We need a leader who will be able to be a leader of Ruchot, a leader of all the different characters and all the different spirits. And being a community leader, we know, you need to be a person who can deal with all the different Ruchot, all the different characters, all the different spirits, all the different diversities. And that's something which stood out for me from Rav Yossi. How he was able, as we mentioned, Susan I think mentioned earlier on, how approachable he was. A person who he was liked by so many people. I never heard a bad word about Yossi here in my 7 years here. People only spoke highly of Yossi. Secondly, we heard Reverend Amursi describing Yossi as an etz. The Tariana talked about ascending the mountain of Hashem. David HaMelech talks about entering the tent of the Almighty. So Yossi's climbed the mountain, sees the land, he's a tree, but he also entered the tent of the Almighty. David HaMelech says in Psalm 16, who will sojourn, who will dwell in your tent? And King David says, person who speaks truth in his heart. The way he portrays himself is what he feels about you inside. This was something which I really felt about Rav Yossi, as Rabbi Dweck said earlier on, his candidness. He was very blunt and to the point. There was no, as our Hachamim call it, ehad bapeh ve'ehad balev. He would project something different to who he really was. What you saw is what you got, Rav Yossi. Dover emet bilvavo, the truth was in his heart, and that was portrayed out. In his pursuit of truth. But perhaps most importantly, for me at least, like you mentioned, I was a successor, and yes, indeed I was a successor. And you hear sometimes of community rabbis who take on new communities, and it can be difficult shaking off the shackles of the previous leader, because they're always judged, and they're always maybe getting advice from the previous leader. This, do this, you shouldn't do, this is good, this is bad. I promise you, never once Yossi told me do this or don't do that. I called him many times and I asked him advice on things, and I sought his counsel. But never did he say, you shouldn't do this, or you should do that. He didn't interfere. He gave advice when he was asked for, as our Hachamim say, he gave advice when you asked for it. But he didn't put his nose into things which weren't his. He recognized he had served his 40 plus years and appointed the next person. And so these are the memories which we have of Rav Yossi, very dear ones. We miss him terribly. He was such a humble person, such an honest person, such a kind person, and a person who we miss tremendously, but who contributed so much to our Wembley family. We take the opportunity to wish Ayman Rokim, to Claudine, Gabrielle, Natalie, and Yaniv, entire community, May his memory be for blessing. Amen. Amen.
So, just for the final part of the service, as we mentioned last week, Yossi's father wrote a book, I think about 2003, and we've been reading it obviously since Yossi's passing. And Rabbi Burgess is going to read something from it.
In this week's parasha, which is Korach, first of all, please let me thank Jack and the committee that organized today's event. I'm not sure that you realize how much effort went in behind the scenes, and a lot of thanks and appreciation from us for a service that I know the Spanish and Portuguese community in particular have been wanting to hold for a while. And I hope that this will also catalyze a program that we've talked about and that we'd like to see actualized, which is to convert the recordings that we have of Yossi's singing to an online archive. The book that I'm sharing from is called Rechev Yisrael. It means the chariot of Israel. The first letters, Reish, Chaf, and Bet, are an acronym for Rabbi Kamios Ben Zion Houri. And I understand that this is a project that Yossi dedicated quite a lot of time to. And it is a tribute to, I guess, the long history of rabbinic leaders that were in his family. So in this week's parasha of Korach, the fourth pasuk talks about Moshe's response when Korach and his followers rebelled against Moshe's leadership. It says, "Vayishma Moshe vayipol al panav." Moshe heard their voice and he fell upon his face. And the implication is that he lost his mantle of leadership. And the style of Rabbi Kamios Ben Zion Houri is slightly different than what you would expect. He talks about a topic, then he adds a little bit more information, then he digresses a little bit, and he returns to the topic. So this topic is about the pain of machloket, right? How one who is in a leadership position, and then also within communities, I think this can be equally applied, the pain that results from people who should be working together, fighting instead. And so he brings the example, he says, of the hammer that strikes the anvil. And if a brass hammer strikes an anvil, it makes a loud sound. But if it strikes a piece of gold, the sound doesn't resonate as much. And the explanation given as to why that difference is because Eine dome ach shemake achiv leish zar shemake ish zar. There is no comparison between two brothers who are fighting against each other as there is when two strangers have a conflict. And therefore he explained that Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the leader of the 12 tribes, would have expected, if nothing else, the family of his own tribe. Korach was from the tribe of Levi. He would have expected them to give him support. And therefore, when they took away their support and challenged his leadership, it caused all the more hurt. And then he draws the example of Abraham Avinu and Lot, where when they grew to the size that they were both well-to-do, their shepherds started to argue with each other. And the verse says that Abraham came to Lot and explained to him, Al na tehi meriva beini uveinecha. Let there not be a conflict between you and I. If you wish, the land in front of us is vast. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. And if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Ki anashim achim anachnu, because we are brothers. Achim davka, he says, shahari ko'evet me'od meriva shel kerovim. Because the strife between those who are related hurts more than those who are not. And then he draws an example of the story of the jealousy of Yosef, which led to Joseph being sold into slavery and the Jewish people being descending into slavery in Egypt. And he at first tries to justify the response of the brothers to Joseph because he thinks out loud that it is possible that his brothers were concerned that Joseph speaking badly about them to his father, which is what we understand he did, would possibly cause Jacob to disinherit some of the children, just as Abraham disinherited Ishmael and Isaac disinherited Esau. And so they felt that it was a time of threat, and they responded with a response that led to the sale of Joseph to a caravan that eventually took him into Egypt. And then he goes on to say, Lo matzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael kali machazik bracha ela hashalom. So what is the antidote to this kind of internal strife and jealousy? There is no vessel that can hold the blessings of the Almighty greater than the vessel of peace. And he gives an example. He says, there's no comparison between having one stick and having a group of sticks. If you want to break one stick at a time, you can do that very easily. But when a people are united together, it makes it much harder to cause them harm. And then finally, he uses that for the purpose of, I guess, encouraging or charging his audience with the responsibility of teshuvah. He says that, in particular, Aleinu lachzor b'teshuvah u'letaken et ma'asenu u'beprat me'inyan lashon hara u'beprat im anashim shemolichim meviim ad sheba'avonot harabim al yedei divrehem mafridim ben ish li'ishto u'bein ha'achim u'bein ha'banim. That there's nothing more important than stopping this process, this habit, this custom of people trading in gossip and being envious of each other to the point that it causes a separation between husband and wife and between brothers, between parents and children. Lashon hara, he says, is like shooting an arrow. Once you've let go of the bow, it is almost impossible to recall it. And then he says that Lashon hara might even be considered greater than idolatrous practice, than avodah zarah. Because he says from avodah zarah, a person can do teshuvah. But once one has spoken Lashon hara, it is almost impossible to repair the harm that is done by words that have gone out and affected many people. And so he says we should rededicate ourselves lihishtadel behavat hashalom in order to create peace. Ki hu yesod kiyamenu bigalut hazeh, because peace is the foundation for our survival in our exile. And he closes with a comparison to Aaron HaKohen and says, why did the people of Bnei Israel Vayivku et Aaron Shloshi Yom Kol Beit Israel. Why did they mourn Aaron for 30 days? V'zot al Shahya Ohev Shalom V'rodev Shalom. It is because he was known for being a person who loved peace and who sought out peace.
The final recording is particularly poignant for me, for my bar mitzvah. And as you know, here at the S&P, there's 3 parashas where we read a special tune. One is the Ten Commandments, one is the Isaac Song of Moses. Then following me, my bar mitzvah, Mishpatim, the last verse is in that same tune. And I'm going to play it now.
ואל משה אמר עלה אל אדוני אתה ואהרון נדב ואביהו ו70 מזקני ישראל והשתחוויתם מרחוק וניגש משה לבדו אל פני והם לא ייגשו והעם לא יעלו עמו ויבוא משה ויספר לעם את כל דברי התנאי ואת כל המשפטים ויעל כל העם כל אחד ויאמרו כל הדברים כאשר דיבר עלי נעשה ויכתוב משה את כל דברי תנאי וישכם בבוקר ויבן מזבח תחת ההר ו12 מצבה ל12 שבטי ישראל וישלח את נערי בני ישראל ויעלו עולות ויזבחו זבחים שלמים לאדוני פרים ויקח משה חצי הדם וישם בעגנות וחצי הדם זרק על המזבח ויקח ספר הברית ויקרא באוזניהם ויאמרו כל אשר דיבר אלי נעשה ונשמע ויקח משה את הדם ויזרוק על העם ויאמר הנה דם הברית אשר קראתי עמכם על כל הדברים ויעל משה ואהרון נדב ואביהו ושירים מזקני ישראל ויראו את אלוהי ישראל ותחת רגליו כמעשה לבנת הספיר וחצן השמיים לתוכר ואל אצילי בני ישראל לא שלח ידו ויחזו את האלוהים ויאכלו וישתו ויאמר אדוני אל משה עלה אלי ההרה וישם ואתנה לך את לוחות האבן והתורה והמצווה אשר כתבתי להורותם ויקום משה ויהושע משרתו ויעל משה אל הר האלוהים ואל הזקנים אמר שבו לנו בזה עד אשר נשוב עליכם והנה אהרון וחור עמכם מבעל דברים ייגש עליהם ויעל משה אל ההר ויכס הענן את ההר וישכון כמותניים על הר סיני ויכסהו הענן ששת ימים ויקרא אל משה ביום השביעי מתוך הענן ומראה כבוד אדוני כאש אוכלת בראש ההר לעיני בני ישראל ויבוא משה בתוך הענן ויעל אל ההר ויהי משה בהר 40 יום ו40 לילה ו40 לילה.
To finish off, it's our custom here we read a shiv or something from Psalm 119, forming the acrostic of the deceased name. So, obviously, Yossi 4 letters. First, I'd like to call on son-in-law, Rabbi, to do it.
ידיך עשוני ויכוננוני, הבינני ואל מדע מצוותיך, יראיך יראוני וישמחו, כי לדברך ייחלתי, ודעתי אדוני כי צדק משפטיך ואמונה עיניתני, יהי נחס בך לנחמני, כי אמרתך לעבדיך, יבואו לי רחמך ואחיה, כי תורתך שעשועי, יבושו זדים כי שקר הביטוני, אני אסיר בפיקודיך, ישובי לי יראיך ויראה עדותיך, יהי לי בתמים בחוקיך למען לא אבוש.
Valves on page 130, fourth paragraph. Vivo uni hasadecha Adonai, eshuatecha kimratecha, e'eineh horefi davar, כי רתתי בדבריך ואתצל, מפי דבר אמת עד מאוד. הנה משפטיך החלתי, ושמרת תורה לך תמיד לעולם ועד, ואתהל לך ברחבה. הנה קודיך דרשתי, ואדברה ועדותיך נרד מלכים ולא אבוש. ואשתעשע במצוותיך אשר אהבתי, ושח אפיי אל מצוותיך אשר אהבתי, ועשיחה בחוקיך.
זרעיפים שנאתי, בתורתך אהבתי, סתרי ומכמניית, על דבריך ייחלתי, שוב ממני מרעים, ועשר המצוות אלוהי, שמחני כמראתך ואחיה, אל תביישני מספרי, צעדני ובשע, ושעה בחוקיך תמיד, צדית כל שולחים מחוקיך, שקר תרמיתם, שירים השבתת כל רשעי הארץ, לכן אהבתי עדותיך, סמר מפחדך, בשר ישועתך יראתי.
Yud, page 131. ידיך עשוני ויכוננוני, הביני אלמדה מצוותיך, יראיך יראוני וישמחו, כי דבריך ייחלתי, ידעתי אדוני כי צדק משפטיך, אמונה עיניתני, נחתך לנחמני, כי אמרתך בעבדיך, יבואני רחמך ואחיה, כי תורתך שעשוע יבושו זדים, כי שקר עבדתוני. אני אציע בפקודיך, ישובו לי יראיך, ויודע עדותיך, יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך, למען לא אבוש. מה זה מצב ועבדו הפרתם לשם והושיעם, כי חסו בו. איש יש רמה.
Please be upstanding for the Hashkaba. מרבתך אשר צפנת יראיך, פעלת לחוסים בך נגד בני אדם. מה יקר חסדך אלוהים, וצל קנאתך יחי ציון, ירבו מידי של ביתך, ונחל עדניך תשכם, טוב שם משמן טוב, ביום המוות מיום היוולדו. סוף דבר הכל נשמע את אלוהים ירא ואת מצוותיו שמור, כי זה כל האדם. יענזו חסידים בכבוד, ירננו על משכבותם. מנוחה נכונה לישיבה עליונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלת קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע יראו מזהירים, בחילוץ עצמים וכפרת אשמים, והרחקת פשע והקרבת פשע, וחמלה וחנינה מלפני שוכן מעונה, וכולה כתבה לחיי העולם הבא. שמתי מנת מחיצת ישיבת נפש השם הטוב, הישיש הרב יוסי בן רבי כמוס חורי, רוח אדוני תלחם בגן עדן, תתפטר מן עלמדים כראות אל המר שמיה וערה, המלך ברחמה ויחוס ויחמול עליו, וילווה אליו השלום, ועל משכבו יהיה שלום, כדכתיב יבוא שלום ינוחו על משכבותיו מולך נחוקו, ובכל בני ישראל שוכבים עמו, בכלל הרחמים והסליחות, וכן יהי רצון ונאמר אמן, מילה המוות לא נצח, ומחר אדוני ליהודים מעל כל פנים, וחרפת עמו יסיר מעל כל הארץ, כי אדוני דיבר, וחיו מתיך, בני בלת יקומון, הקיצו ורנינו שוכני עפר, כי תלונות עליך, בארץ רפאים תפיל, ואורח ומכפר עוון ולא ישחית, ויתפעל להשיב אפו ולא יעיל כל חמתו, וכתיב כי איש אשר עמו תנחמנו, כן אנוכי אנחמכם, יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבנו, ועמד וברך ירותי וימיך מלכותי ויצמח פורקני ויקרב בשכם, חייכון ובכל חיי וכל בית ישראל, בהגדה בזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. ועליו לעלמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמך דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מכל ברכתה, שירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, ואמירם בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, חיים ושבע וישועה ונחמה ושזבה ורפואה וגאולה שליחה וכפרה ורעים לך והצלה. לעם כל עמו ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו וברחמיו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ואמרו אמן. תהא נשמתו צרורה בצרור החיים. אמן.
Dean Natalie, who's in Israel, hopefully will be able to watch the recording this event, to Yaniv, Gabrielle, to the whole family. We've heard this afternoon at this very moving memorial service how loved Yossi was as a husband, father, grandfather, but also the terrible loss to our community of a cherished friend, leader, a wonderfully talented Hazan, but above all else, a modest and genuine person who was with us through both happy moments as well as some sad moments. The legacy that Yossi leaves behind is a good name and an imprint on so many lives that still lives on, as the wonderful teachings and recordings we have continue to be used. I remember the morning of Sunday, 28th of November 2021, as if it was only today. Walking into Lauderdale Road for Shacharit service, one of the regular members came up to me and said that Rabbi Leah would not be attending, as he was busy organising the funeral of the minister at Wembley. Completely taken aback, I inquired who he was talking about, and he said Yossi. I was completely shocked. I had only seen Yossi a few weeks before and talked on the phone to him the previous week. A few minutes later, another member of the congregation walked in and inquired whether I had heard about Yossi's passing. The morning service passed in a complete haze, and then I knew I had the difficult task of relaying the news both to our family and our congregation here at Wembley. We were due to have our annual Hanukkah party a few hours later to celebrate the first night of Hanukkah. I knew I had to get a message sent out before then. I asked for the news to be sent out on our synagogue WhatsApp group and by email. As it happened, we decided to come together and light the Hanukkah. And then as a congregation, we remembered Yossi and told stories of the effect Yossi had on our lives. For me personally, as well as the recordings Yossi made, he left helpful guides for nearly every festival. For Pesach, he created a slip to show which pages should be used for the Shabbat of the middle days, as the prayer book itself had a lot of going back and forth. For Rosh Hashanah, he created a page with every single note of the shofar to be blown, as again in the prayer book, it is grouped together, thereby ensuring not a note would be missed when called out to the person blowing the shofar. Finally, for Sukkot, he wrote out detailed notes, noting for every single word, not only in which direction the lulav would be to be shook, but also in which direction you should be facing in reference to the teva position. Again, I've got these if anyone wants to see it, beautiful notes. Finally, a few thank yous. Firstly, to the entire Wembley committee and congregation, as well as our wonderful, generous donors who provided us with full financial support to put on such a fitting tribute to Yossi. To Ronnie Sabah, Gina DeSmith and Sonia Sassoon, who came together with myself to put together this event, providing incredibly useful advice and help. To Deanna for her help with organising the event, the Ladies Guild who have put together all the food, and to all the efforts put in by John in helps with the admin side that such an event requires, as well as being here today on the Sunday to help us set up for the event. Also thank you to Guy for your recording expertise. Last but not least, a big thank you to everyone who took part in the service and for all the wonderful stories shared today. On behalf of our congregation, I wish all of Yossi's family many more years free from further sorrow, and may Yossi's memory continue to be a source of inspiration in all your lives. Amen. That concludes the service. There is food downstairs.